Everybody Hurts was a big hit when I was a teenager, and I was still actively in the process of learning English. And I was so intrigued by it, this deep pain and loneliness that permeates the stanzas, and then this simple, everybody hurts sometimes of the chorus. Now, as I said, I was still actively learning English back then, and I only knew hurt as an active verb. As in, I hurt someone, I'm inflicting pain on someone, rather than I hurt, so I feel pain. And I thought, what a great and strange song. It gets at this really raw part of the human condition, that we are bound to hurt each other, whether we want to or not. We are bound to mess up, we're bound to make mistakes, and our mistakes will impact others, impact them negatively regardless of our intention. Our human inability to not inflict pain, that is really something. It's worth a song, a hauntingly sad one at that. And then later on, I learned more English, and I found out the real meaning, the fact that REM are simply telling us that sometimes everybody hurts. And I was like, well, duh. I was really disappointed. It's still a beautiful song, and it's still a really true song. But I liked my original interpretation better. And yet, both is true. Sometimes we hurt other people. Sometimes other people hurt us. And sometimes we hurt because we hurt someone unintentionally. And especially the latter can happen so easily lately. It always happened in private relationships. It always happened with people we love, but it seems that lately, in the last few years, we started to have a lot of really hard conversations, both within Unitarian Universalism and in the world at large. There were so many conversations that came out of this really deep place of hurt and despair and anger. The Me Too movement, conversations about immigration, about ableism, about race, sexual orientation, gender identity, oppression. And these conversations are so hard to have. They feel loaded. Because essentially, when we talk about any type of oppression, we're talking about hurt. We're talking about people being hurt. And any stumble on the part of those who are still learning how to talk about oppression can mean crashing right into the bruises, the raw, open wounds of those who are hurt by that particular form of oppression. And we have to have these conversations regardless of how loaded they feel, because we cannot fix what we don't talk about. At the same time, we want to be intentional and careful, but even with the best of our intentions, we keep learning and we stumble along, and sometimes we hurt others, and sometimes we get called out for that, which also hurts. And then we fall into this never-ending cycle of hurt and hurting, and that's often where we get stuck. Over the last year and a half, and even just in the last few weeks, when I was in Chicago for intensive classes at Meet the Lombard Theological School, my seminary, I observed or even was involved in many of these incidents. Things like that happen everywhere, but they happen especially frequently in seminary. I mean, imagine you compile a whole bunch of people who all like to talk, who are all invited to bring their full selves, and who are all invested in making the world a better place. And therefore they like to talk about the really messy topics. And you compile them all together, and then you have intensive classes which which means 8 hours of class for 5 days in a row, and then sometimes they tack the weekend onto that. So you have all those people who bring their best selves, but they're also annoyed and exhausted and tired. It can get really stormy sometimes. And people are clumsy. They're still processing. They say or do the wrong thing, and that thing really hurts someone sometimes. And it creates a moment of stuckness. And really, we all know this doesn't just happen in seminary, but it happens anywhere where we try to engage about the hard topics, and sometimes even right here at church. Fortunately, at Meadville, they also teach us how to unstuck ourselves. Sometimes those lessons come from the professors, and sometimes they come from each other. And one of the things that really worked for me was this meditation we did earlier. May your mind be clear, may your heart be open, may your spirit and your body be linked so that you can serve the world in love and return safely home. I learned this one from Karen, who's a fellow seminarian of mine, and her teaching congregation is in Wisconsin. And I think it's a meditation that can help us when we get stuck on a topic, stuck on a moment when someone else messed up or treated as badly, but even more so, it can help us unstuck ourselves when we messed up, when we made a mistake. Regardless what the topic or the situation, publicly or private, and we feel embarrassed, and we feel guilty, and maybe even ashamed, and we get stuck. Let's start from the top. May your mind be clear. Usually we talk about an open mind, right? So what does it mean instead to have a clear mind? A mind that is not just open, but also clear, right? Imagine your mind is like a sliding door on the subway. If it's open, but the subway is full, that's still problematic, right? So then a clear mind maybe is a mind that is not crowded. It's not necessarily an empty mind, but it's a mind that's focusing on what is truly there, what happened, rather than the would-haves and the could-haves. It's a mind that doesn't get caught up in our own story, the story that only we are privy to. This is not what I meant. This was not my intention. I didn't set out to hurt anyone. Instead, it's a mind that can hold the impact of our action as well. When I was in Chicago this January, I had one of those moments where I said the wrong thing. We were having a discussion about racism in one of my classes, and I had a thought that I wanted to share. I thought it was a really good thought. So I was excited about it, and I did so before the thought was finished, before I took proper time to think it through. And what came out of my mouth was really problematic. In fact, it sounded like the exact opposite of what I meant to say. So another student, a student of color who has been hurt by racism all her life and who was no doubt hurt and angry about my comment, called me out for it, quite publicly. She wasn't mean about it at all, but she also wasn't gentle. And she said very clearly what she needed to say, and she ended it with, "This was white supremacist." And I stood there, and I said, yes, it was. And then we were both silent for something like 5 seconds, though to me it felt like 5 hours, 5 excruciating hours. I felt bad and embarrassed and ashamed. And I also knew that in that moment, all my good intentions did not matter. What mattered was the impact of my words, right in that moment. The fact is that sometimes we make mistakes, and with our mistakes, we hurt people, with our actions and our words, regardless of our intentions. The hurt is real. When we are in a car and we hit a pedestrian accidentally, assuring them in the moment that we did not need to hit them will not unbreak their bones. And it will not stop the bleeding. Similarly, assuring someone in the moment that we did not actually mean what we said when we hurt them will not make their hurt and their anger and their reaction go away. I'm not saying that our intentions don't matter. They do. But the impact matters just as much. And then when the impact is so acute, it's what it needs to be taken care of first. That's why when my classmates said, this was white supremacist, and everything in me, every single fiber of my being wanted to say, but it's not what I meant. Let me explain myself. I didn't mean to say it like that. I'm not that. I'm not white supremacist. You have to believe me. Instead, I just focused on what had actually happened in that moment, what had come out of my mouth, and the impact it had on her. And I said, yes. Yes, it was. And I leaned into the tension and into owning my mistake. The next part, though, let your heart be open. If a clear mind looks at the impact, an open heart is all about intention. It's about giving people the benefit of doubt. And not just when it comes to our own intentions, but also of the other person, both before the hurt and after the hurt. Because let's face it, sometimes when we inadvertently make a mistake and we cause hurt without meaning to, it is easy to get a bit defensive. And when we get defensive, that is also when we have to keep an open heart. Last year, and I told you, seminary is wild. Last year, I was talking with a fellow seminarian, and in that case, I was the person who got hurt and who called him out. It was just in the beginning of the Me Too movement, and he was working through it and grappling with it, and he processed some thoughts, and just like me this January, he didn't quite think them through. And I got mad at him, just as somebody got mad at me this January. And I called him out, and I wasn't gentle. In fact, I think I was a bit mean. It was not very ministerial. It was not one of my best moments. And afterwards, I was like, well, that was not great of me, but it also wasn't great of him, so I just avoided it, and I just avoided him. And then this January, he sought me out, and he came to me, and I was like, ugh. And then he said, Rica, I get it now. I get what you tried to explain to me. Took me a long time, but I get it. And I want you to know that now I am explaining that very thing to other people who aren't quite there yet. And I was so touched. And I thanked him, and I apologized for getting so mad at him. And what he said to me was, Rica, I understand that you weren't mad at me, but at the whole situation that caused this hurt and that caused this oppression. He kept an open heart, even after I called him out and even after I was mean. And he kept an open heart, not just to my arguments, but also to my pain and to that situation where my reaction came from. And then his open heart allowed me to come to me and to make amends. And it was a moment of true beauty and grace. May your spirit and your body be linked. This, out of all of them, is my favorite one. And it's probably because it's one that I'm still learning so much. I'm not thinking about that one much. I'm not good at it. And I dare say that traditionally, we as a denomination aren't super great at it either. We UUs are quite a heady bunch. We have a tendency to process in our head and to shush our bodies, make them still, ignore them, shut them out of this whole process of spirituality. And yet when we get hurt, be it physical, emotional, or spiritual, our bodies get activated. Our bodies react too. Our heart rate rises, adrenaline gets our body gets stuck too in this activation. Now, my instinct usually is to work on the emotional or the spiritual part first. And I hope that if I can sort it out here, then my body will just follow suit. However, sometimes tending to our bodies first is easier and a little bit more helpful. That's why we tell little children to take a deep breath, right? Or to walk it out, or whatever we tell to little children, but we don't do it ourselves. And though deep breathing is a really good start, there's more than what we can do. We can feel the hurt, the activation in our bodies, and tend to them. Calm them, sit with them until we start feeling a little bit better. And it takes us out of our head for a moment, just as this part about bodies takes us out of the topic for the sermon for a second, right? And it can be a really welcome break. It can be a break where we just focus on something else than what just happened. We focus on our bodies. We can stop focusing on our spinning thoughts, our aching feelings, and instead of that, we can get in touch with our senses again to ground ourselves. What do I feel like? What does this room feel like? What do I hear? What does it feel like when I feel so flushed and I just put my cold hands on my cheeks for a second and feel this wonderful cooling motions? What do I hear? What do I see? And that can help us to ground ourselves. If we want to bring our full selves and our best selves, we need to bring our bodies too, and we need to tend to them, stay connected to them, lean into the link, settle into the hurt until our breath becomes calm again, and the waves in our blood streams gentle. And then, only then can we serve the world with love. Because it is not just when we put our minds, but also our hearts, our full selves, our body into what we're doing, that we are at our best. And it is when we put our heart into it. If and when we stumble and fall, it hurts the most. And it is also when we put our heart and our whole selves into it that we are most likely to get up again and to try again. In fact, it is then that we are most likely to take the leap that could end in a fall, but it can also push us off to fly. And often we do just that. We learn a new sport regardless of the faults. We study subjects and build careers regardless of the stumbles and the disappointments. We immerse ourselves in relationships so fully with those we love the most, knowing for sure that in the process, our hearts are bound to get chipped a little, if not full on broken. And yet we do it. And so it's the same when we work to end oppression in the world, to build a beloved community. We have to put our heart into it. And maybe it's a little bit harder, because as we know, these topics are messy and a little bit explosive. If we are on the side of those who feel the oppression, we are bound to get hurt. And if we find ourselves positioned on the side of those not oppressed, on the side of those with the power, be it because of our race or our gender or our class, sexual orientation, and so on and so on, we already deal with feelings of guilt and shame and defensiveness. So the prospect of immersing ourselves even more to it, and the prospect of making a mistake, of stumbling and falling and thereby adding to the hurt, seems really scary and disheartening. Maybe that's why it felt so deeply, deeply painful and excruciating when my classmate called me out on my own white supremacy in that moment. And I would lie if I didn't say that for a short moment, I was defensive. I was even a little bit petulant. For a short moment, my reaction was to just throw it all down, to cross my arms and says, fine then, fine. If you think I'm so bad at it, I won't do any more anti-racism work. Ha, fine. But instantly, work for show. I'm not doing this work for others, for my classmates. I am doing this work because this is where love leads me personally. It's the key to unlocking my purpose and my salvation. And yours might be different, a different cause, a different path. But see where love leads you, and then serve the world right here with putting in everything you got, your whole heart, your full self, not afraid of the stumbles and the heartbreaks, because here is the final part of our meditation, that you may return safely home. May you return to a place where you are loved and you are safe, and people will see you for the person that you are and not the mistakes you make. As we build this beloved community for the world, we also build it for ourselves. We build a community where we can engage with the hard topics, where we can leap and we can stumble and fall, and then someone will extend a hand and help us up again. A place where our mistakes are not ignored, and where sometimes we might even be called out for them, but also a place where we are not condemned for our mistakes, where we don't become our mistakes, but we are also always feel seen fully and held in love. Because this is what happened to me after I messed up and was called out. My classmates took care of me, and my classmates also took care of the other student. They made sure we were both okay. And then later on, I talked with friends to process, and with the professor of the class, and even to Reverend Sean, and they all helped me process and made sure that I was okay, and made sure that I would take something from this and grow. In this song, Everybody Hurts, there is a line that goes, "'Cause everybody hurts, take comfort in your friends." And then a little later, if you feel like you're alone, no, you're not alone. In this beloved community that we are building, we won't be alone even if we mess up. Because this is how we as individuals, as a congregation, as a community, and as a denomination can engage with the topics that are messy and hard. If we accept that we make mistakes, all of us. If we accept that other people will react, that they have a right to react to our mistakes. If we trust that we have the tools to unstuck ourselves right here within us, and we trust that there will be others to help us along. And then we learn, and we make amends, and we grow, and we evolve. And if we, as those who witness mistakes, also serve each other with love, we can build a community, a deeply loving community, where we can cushion each other's messiness, hold each other accountable, while also tending to each other's bruises. Always see each other, neither for the mistake we commit, nor for the good intentions that underlie our mistakes, but always for the potential and the growth that we all embody. May it be so.
Let's rise, God your spirit, and sing about that safe home, huh?